Hello, and welcome to the round 3 recap of the 2014 US Champ Championship? No, US Chess Championship. US Champ Championship 2014. Yeah. I love it when I can't barely speak, but that happens to all of us. But okay, the goal here was to make these quicker than the others, so let's dive right into the games. So, the first game we're going to look at is Ray Robson against Gata Kamsky. And we had the Berlin bishop e5, knight f6. I think Robson is more or less always opening with e4. Kamsky, usually playing the Rue Lopez with black. Of course, if white goes bishop e5, and knight takes e4. So here the main line is d4, the most common move when we have this Berlin endgame, which came to the forefront again in the World Championship match where Vladimir Kramnik dethroned the great Garry Kasparov. He just held him every time with this endgame, sort of playing to his strengths and against Kasparov's weakness. And well, since then this has been a topical opening for black, and maybe one that has sort of moved the trend more towards d4 openings, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, white is finding ways to give black problems, but on the other hand, this is always solid, and black sometimes also plays it for a win. It's black has its trumps, the bishop pair, so it's still strategically complex. It's not a simple position that you can simply hold against a higher rated opponent. But the Robson went for this rook e1, which tends to be more dry, especially if both parties are unambitious. So let's say d4 98 is coming soon. And if black has to play d5, we're going to just have a completely symmetrical pawn structure. Both sides will have the same 3 here, 1 queen pawn, and 3 here. So that's going to be very dry and hard to do much for either side. So d5 here is at least a try for a small advantage with the space advantage. But still, black is very solid. And let's see what happens. We have a bishop exchange, which should benefit black because bishop on e7 was a little bit passive, so a small game there for black. But on the other hand, white has a space advantage here. This pawn here guarantees a space advantage. But there aren't many pawn breaks. Okay, white tries to keep a rook here, which indicates that he might want to try for something. But after b6 we see that white is very restricted here. He's going to try to do something, and then he has to, either b4, then we exchange one pawn, and then push c5, then we exchange more pawns, and hard to make things happen on the queen side. So we have symmetry on the king side, so basically more or less nothing happened in this game. Black is very solid, but can't really play for a win because of his space disadvantage. So here, being slightly lower rated, Robson agreed to a draw here. So not much going on there. So Kamsky yet to win a game in 3 rounds, 3 draws. And so far the same for his for the second seat, Alexander Onischuk. I was going to say nemesis, but no, maybe they're best friends. I have no clue. So one man, one enemy, but you never know. So Jacobian with white, and we've seen a bunch of Nimsos so far in this tournament. And this treatment, d6, it's interesting that black can simply play like this, in sort of an uncritical way. You just want to set up what I call more or less a Nimso position with b6, bishop e7, the knights go here. very compact, and as always, black tries to control this e4 square. So bishop e7, bishop d2, c5. Black will castle quickly. Oh, d5 first, okay. Bishop takes d5, bishop f4. And now finally castles. And okay, white has the bishop here, which is probably going to give him, you know, 0.1 or 0.2 on the computer, but black is really solid. And here the rook takes, with the bishop. And now we can move the queen somewhere, maybe on this diagonal. Queen c7, okay, and then queen p7. So this is a usual battery on this diagonal. And then the rook can come to c8. It looks really solid for black. Rook c1, c5. And also in this game not much didn't happen. And sometimes when you have, okay, again, just like in the Kamsky game, we have, you know, sort of symmetrical pawns. We have pawns on the same files, but okay, they have to move differently. But usually this means that there are no obvious pawn breaks, and without pawn breaks, sometimes the positions can be dry, and strong players will find some, excuse my language, some shit ways to make a threefold repetition. Here they seem both happy with repeating the position, and another draw. So yeah, perhaps two of the most dry games so far in this tournament. Robson, Kamsky, and and Onischuk. Not much happening. But Josh Friedel with white against Mackenzie Muller. And yeah, in this game we had an interesting anti-Grunfeld line. And I think this is actually what I think David Navarra played a really nice game against Robert Riz in the regular Open last year. And if I find it, it's a really interesting game. If I find it, I'll post a link in the description. Knight takes e2. 8-6, knight back to f3. And white has managed to keep his pawns here in the center without, you know, any immediate attack on them. So black can't play c5 yet. This pawn is protected. White's going to get castled. So probably a safe edge for white here. Castles. We can't play e5 either to break, because then we lose the bishop for the knight, which is useful for white. So white has managed to control the black pawn breaks and wants to put the bishop here on, sorry, the knight here on d3. Then we're controlling c5 and e5. Probably there are some ideas of tactical shots here, like knight takes g6 if we can dislodge this queen somehow. Hard to see how we can do that though. But if it's white to move here, we can go e5, and then because of this pin we can take on g6. So those are some things that black has to consider. So king h7 might explain this move, which is kind of neutral, but now knight d3, and we're controlling the pawn breaks, so I think white should be somewhat better here. The only question is how much. So black lashes out here with f5, yeah, which is also one of the ideas with king h7 on putting this pawn. You know, I'm trying to contest this big center that white has got. So white takes. So yeah, black is trying to get active play. And okay, now maybe we've got this d5 square and some activity on the f file. Before we move on the knight, we have to take care of this pawn, etc. But okay, the downside of all this is that black now has probably a slightly worse pawn structure. You can imagine his king becoming weak if you know, this pawn lacks protection, this pawn is isolated. But okay, also white has an isolated pawn, but it's much better protected. So knight c5 was played, queen d5, and knight takes a6. Okay. So now definitely white is for choice here. With the better pawn structure, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn islands for black, and only 3 for white. And you know, all these pawns seem to be readily attacked by the white pieces, so white should be better here. And here he is about to win a pawn, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against 6. A5 is dropping off the board, so white should be for choice here. But, okay, we exchange the A pawn for the B pawn. And now get the C pawn, but unfortunately white didn't manage to make anything of his advantage. And next move, okay, game is already drawn here. Black will take on C5. And this should be a draw. Okay, white has a slightly better pawn structure, but can't really do anything, so yet another draw. Draw. So on we go. Edinburgh against Shankland. E4, E5, another Rui Lopez. So yeah, Shankland wants to go for the Berlin here as well, but here we see another anti-Berlin with D3. Yeah, this is probably more common than the rookie one line that Robson chose. But here, play will more or less resemble the Italian game rather than Spanish, because often this bishop ends up here anyway, and black hasn't even played A6. Most likely he will, but okay, D6, bishop D7, knight F1. A standard maneuver. Knight wants to go to G3 or E3, and from there he can ice some squares that could be potential outposts. Bishop back to C4. So now, yeah, really starting to resemble an Italian game. And not much going on really. Both sides, have the knight similarly placed. The only plus for white perhaps is the better bishop. But is that enough here? Probably not. Queen takes. Pawn takes. Knight h5, okay. Yeah, I mean this is not pre, but he's undermining this guy. So c4 closing the diagonal. And all of a sudden maybe black can think about, okay, white has a d-file, but this piece is rather bad, so maybe this position is more suited for the knights. So maybe black can start to think about a nominal edge here. But once again, we see yet another game where, pawns on B and C, and same here, pawns on the king side. So kind of symmetrical pawns, and not many pawn breaks. The only pawn break here is kind of B4 for black. That's what it does, but this will lead to simplification rather soon. Knight has to go back, and we'll take C4. And again, if I had to take a side here, I would take black, because we have pawns on on one side of the board, so knights will probably play better here. But I don't think they played much further here, so yeah, we just agree to a draw here. Very hard to make progress for either side without compromising their position, so yet another draw, and actually the 10th draw in a row here at least. 10th or 11th, so can we finally get a decisive result? Ramirez against Lendeman. So we have the French defense. We have had a bunch of French defenses. We had, I think, 3 yesterday. And almost all of them were the advanced variation. This time we have the terrace variation, 92. And the move C5. Which was popular maybe around the millennium or before, but dropped off a little bit. But then recently it was recommended again in a repertoire book for black, published by Quality Chess, called Playing the French by Jacob Ogart and Nikos Enterlitis. Don't know how to pronounce it. That's my best try. So knight f6, knight b3, this is all well known. Knight c6, knight takes d4. If white is not in the mood to fight, he will play queen takes d4. And black can take immediately or postpone it one move, then something like this. And this tends to be fine for black, so knight takes d4 is more critical. a6 is the standard move. Rook e1. Bishop b3 I think is the most common move. So queen g7, and here we could transpose to a big theoretical line with bishop b3. I think it's around here where white sacrifices this one. And I even think this is the line here. My memory could be tricking me, but I think this is a theoretical line, and the king goes to g6. And that's about as far as I remember. I think c3, knight h5. And trust me, this is all theory. I used to know this back in the days, but I haven't played c5 for a while, so I would need to brush up on this theory before playing this. But white played queen e2. Different approach. Bishop came to c5, c3, h6. Interesting move. A long knight f5. And now king f8. A move that sometimes crops up in the French and the Caracan. I think Lendeman mentioned that he was afraid of something like this because he couldn't remember it. And yeah, it looks a bit dangerous for black to face this without knowing what's going on. So he went for king to f8. So now this knight has to move. I mean, if you take now, h6 is protected. Black should have sufficient defenses. So this looks passive for black, king f8, you know, defending against white's threats. But now black starts to take over the initiative. h5. He wants to push this pawn, got an knight on g4, and all of a sudden, you know, the black pieces start to make sense. And look out below after knight e4. And look at this, he thought for almost 40 minutes here, or over 40 minutes, 124 down to 42. Black played knight g4. Active pieces, tricky knight, problems on h2, what to do? g3, bishop back, and again, you know, pieces on the diagonal, ready for b5, or b5 not b4, putting the bishop here, h4 in some lines, activating the rook, so almost all the black pieces become active, even though, you know, this looks artificial and the rooks are not connected. Black seems to be getting away with it, so bishop f4, e5, bishop g5, f6. Oh, but yeah, sorry, bishop f5 first. At some point he played f6. Yeah, bishop back. Rook d8. I think it's at this point that the computer just goes mental, says h4, and black is just close to winning, which I find just unbelievable. So if we play like a nothing move here, something like this, we can take on g3, and it's just falling apart. We have a move such as this one, and bishop g4, and this is just resignable actually for white. We can even add a piece to the attack, and we can grab material whenever we want. The king is in danger. This is just game over. But rook d8 was played, rook d1, queen c6, and white just seems to be in big trouble here. Bishop d2, okay, opening up attack on this rook, so rook takes d1, queen takes d1. But things are kind of forced here, and unfortunately for white, after this exchange of pieces, this move bishop h3 is hard to deal with, and white sacrificed the exchange. If we move the rook here, bishop takes e3 jack, king to the corner, bishop g4, attacking the rook, threatening mate here on f3. Ugh. And the only way to defend it is with a rook, but then take the piece. We're a piece up, so knight f5 was played, bishop takes f1. And from here it was just a matter of technique. You heard this phrase before. But it was okay, this pawn was attacked, so I moved it. But now black just needs to regroup, bring the king to g7, protect this pawn, then we can free the rook to move it somewhere, d8, g8, you know, depending. White attacked some pawns here, so we had to fix our pawns, but then we just fix the bishop, b8 to d6, bring it back to life, and just quickly going over it. Something like this happened. The bishop came back to life. Bishop is good now. Now the king walks to g7, eventually freeing the rook, which now can move over to the queen side if he wants. That's what he did. But now with the pawns on light squares, the bishop is quite active, and weak black squares for white. And eventually black crashed through. White can, I mean, so many weak pawns, you can't defend them all. So it's just a matter of time here. And around here, yeah, he lost one pawn, and now it's just bad. Attacking g4, defends it, but now here, and then rook d4, picking up another pawn. With a double attack, so finally Ramirez had to resign. So a good win for Lenderman. And the final game for the men was Garrev against Zatonskih. Garrev with white, and we had the King's Indian. With bishop a2, and this is called the Averbach variation. An interesting variation, where sometimes white goes for a pawn wedge on the king set, but that did not happen in this game. Knight c6 was played, d5, knight to e5, knight to f3, we have an exchange here, and knight d7, opening up the diagonal for the bishop. Now queen d2, securing this bishop, not allowing h6. We keep this pawn pinned here. Knight c5. And my feeling here was, yeah, b3, important move. We can't allow black to play a4. So b3. And the feeling in this game was white was well in control. Here he's rerouting the bishop to c2, and then he's freeing the f pawn to move, so we can push e5. Black goes to the counterplay with b5. And, well, there is a counterplay, but also the pawn structure has been weakened for black. e5 has been achieved, and now f5. And, you know, this is a bad piece, so white has the space advantage, better pieces, better pawn structure, and he just made these little things count here. There are some mass exchanges here, but what remains is that white has a space advantage. He has the better bishops, because this one is kind of bad. And what's more important, his bishops can attack the weak black pawns. And really quick here, we're going to see rook c3, and these pawns are becoming targets real quick here. Rook e8, bishop f2. Pawn takes f5, and now we're going to regain our pawn, and black will have a horrible pawn structure here on the king side. Rook takes h4. And pretty soon I think white went. Did he go h5? Okay, eventually he goes h5, but notice the white pawns are on light squares, giving his bishop scope all over the board. Meanwhile, the black pawns are restricting the black squared bishop, and they are weak. White can attack them, black can only defend. h5, yeah, completing the picture. A good lesson for you. In general, you want to put the pawns on the opposite square of your bishop so it can roam freely, and if your opponent is stuck with his pawns on the same squares as, you know, the bishops, the black square bishops, the pawns are going to be weak, going to limit the scope, and most likely they're going to fall. So here pressure on this pawn, but we can't take immediately because of this counterplay. So here I think he was just trying to reach the time control. King f1, move 40 is reached, so everything is safe. So now white can start thinking about making a pass pawn here. Jack, jack, and now I think king e2, protecting this pawn. And another jack, and then a solid bishop e2. Now this pawn is starting to run. Black tries to attack it, gets some counterplay, but he has to give up this pawn. And more importantly, he's forced to exchange the rooks. Because this guy's attacked, he has to go bishop to b4. But now the antagonist is completely lost, and after king e3 he resigned. There's nothing to be done, let's go here. Gonna pick up this pawn, we're gonna be up a pawn. And black can't really do anything. Let's see some moves here. We can attack this pawn. Even start with this move. And black is running out of ideas here. We're gonna attack this bishop. And then this pawn. We're gonna be up 2 pawns, and it's an easy win, so. Therefore, Zatonskih signed. So, on to the women. And for the first time, Irina Krush failed to win. She drew her game here against Irina Onischuk. We had some Queen's Gambit declined stuff here. And white is played really solid, and not much happened. Mass exchanges, and this is starting to resemble more like a Petrov than Queen's Gambit declined. Everything is quite solid here, and difficult for either side to make progress. Perhaps black has the slightly better pawn structure, but not much that can be done with it. And around here they simply repeated moves. So black is, admitting he can't or she can't make any progress. I mean, we can go for this pawn, but this will give up the draw was agreed here, but this gives up the e-file. And now black has to be careful, so she didn't want to gamble on this, so draw was agreed. Here Alicia Manikina with the black pieces started out with 0 out of 2, but here she managed to win, and already this looks weird for white to play b3 and then c3. You play b3 to play bishop b2, so playing c3 immediately blocking this diagonal doesn't make much sense together, so it looks like white was a little bit confused here in the opening. Black has a nice position, a space advantage, protected pass pawn on d4, and this queen looks a bit misplaced here, and indeed this queen got into trouble in this game. Doesn't have any squares. I mean, you can go here, okay, but then what? Yeah, no, if we take immediately, probably the queen is getting trapped. Isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. Looks like it. So can't take. So rook played over here. No protecting the pawn. Because now we had double rook takes c6. Bishop f1, queen b6. And it looks like white panicked here. I mean, the queen doesn't have a lot of squares, so maybe black can start to think about trapping it at some point. When the time is right, either bishop a5 or knight g8. Okay, not immediately because some rook takes c6 ideas, but white played knight takes e5, and this looks too optimistic. Only one pawn for the piece, and yeah, now it's just too much. This is one piece for the queen, and I have seen better compensation for a queen in my chess career, and after bishop f2 being done all the material in the world, probably a US event championship for being done material, but now it's also a mate threat, so victory any assigned. Anna Zatonskih won her second game in a row here against Sabina Foysor in a Nimzo Indian, yet another Nimzo Indian, popular opening in this tournament as well. So looks like she just picked up a pawn here in the opening. So we have 7 pawns for black here against 5. White can get one pawn back, which she does here, but f6 and e5, and we have a solid passed pawn here. And the problem of white is we can't really regain the pawn because bishop c6 picks up this pawn. So black remains up a pawn here. So things have gone wrong for white. Bishop c6. And yeah, just avoiding this knight e7 for Delicious, for Kinyo. And now we start to kick the knight away, and it's just a big problem for black, no, for white. And now the king will penetrate, kick this bishop away eventually. Sorry, kick this knight away with the bishop, and now the king can start penetrating, and up a pawn, good king, pass pawn. This was just a matter of time, and finally around here, white percent. So Zatonskih moves into the lead with Krush with 2.5. Meanwhile, Abrahamian against Nemkova. Quick look. It was an Italian game where white has some space advantage here. And what happened? White seems to keep a space advantage here. Would like to kick the knight away with g3, but we can't at the moment. But white can also advance on the queen side, b4. So there's a5 and up b5, okay. Some weak pawns here to think about for black. And in general, the better pawn structure for white. Attack on the c7 pawn. c6, but this allows the passed a pawn. King h2. So white has a small edge because of the passed a pawn and the better pawn structure. And looks like she just managed to make this count here in the end. Knight to c4. Pawn to e3, and remarkably no dangerous discovered attacks with the knight. You can even take with the queen because discovered attack, we move the queen in front. And now protected pass pawn here, and this decided the game. Queen check, followed by queen b7. So black resigned here. And the final game of the tournament, this round, I will say final game of the tournament, was National Master Asfaran, the 19-year-old. The 19-year-old phenom, no, 13-year-old phenom. She's already 1900, but she's 13 years old. They played a Najdorf, and looked like to me that black was doing quite good. Usually when you get this kind of pawn structure and you manage to exchange the black square bishops like this, usually it's pretty nice for black. It would have been extra nice if we could take with a rook on b4. So let's imagine a rook, either rook here and then take, maybe this rook, I don't know. Then black is, I would think, strategically winning, but here we have to take with a pawn. And now it's a little bit tricky because white has this passed a pawn. I mean, if you take on b4, probably rook b8 gives black good play, and we gonna win one pawn back. So white went bishop e2, b3. So now this gives white some counterplay here. This a pawn. But you know, this knight is a monster piece. So my feeling is that black should be doing quite good here. And we had a positional struggle here. White went for counterplay on the king side, and eventually we got an interesting queen ending. Let's go to that. Check and then takes. Where white has won a pawn here, and eventually black went for the counterplay with the king. King e5, king takes d5. But white is still up a pawn, and more importantly, she has two passed pawns. And they're on the flank, so it's hard to deal with two flank pawns. So black must go for the counterplay as soon as you can, trying to pick up this b3 pawn. eventually that's what happened. But remarkably, it was not the b pawn, but the e pawn with queen. So after h7, e3 check, king to g3, pawn to e2, and now both sides made a queen. So a very complex game, hard to do it justice here in just a few minutes. But the critical point was probably around here where Black overlooked something, because after queen b3 check, she blundered with king to d4. Probably overlooking that she can play queen here. And now it looks like white is winning, because we can play queen check, and this queen is pinned. So we can pick this queen up next move, right? Or even queen here, because if the king moves, or queen here, we're gonna pick up a queen, right? 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 Wrong. Because if you go here, any king move is actually a check by this queen. So it's actually white who's losing a queen here. So that means white has to do something else. Also queen b1. Okay, this might keep the material balanced, but I have a feeling this is difficult for white. King h2, queen jack. Maybe this is okay, taking here. Or is it queen jack? Oh, it's mate. Yeah. So queen c3 might have almost turned the tables, because we either have to take or bring the queen over to like g8, or maybe queen g8 avoids the mate, but either way, then black has a more dangerous pass pawn and could be the one thinking about a win. Instead, king here and now queen takes is simply a win for black, because king takes, picks up the queen, and this one is a lost ending here, and white wins. You can't deal with both pawns. You go for one, you just push the other one, and this king is always in time to reach the d1 square, and this king can't deal with the a and the f pawn, so white wins. So yeah, this means that Zatonskih and Krush, as usual, are leading in the women's department with 2.5 out of 3, and on the men's side, Lenderman is leading. And surprisingly, Kamsky has yet to win a game with 1.5. There are still 8 rounds left in his tournament, so I don't think he's panicking. He's played, 2 games with black, one of them against Garrev. So no doubt that Kamsky is not panicking, and he will eventually join the leaders and most likely win, I think. But at least it's interesting that he's not leaving from start, so he has to come from behind. So we'll see what happens. So once again, if you're still here, thanks for watching. I'll try to keep up with my recaps, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.